Good morning, everybody. It is 11 o'clock. We're going to wait about 2 more minutes to allow other attendees to join. We have a very large audience that has joined us for this presentation. So if you can just bear with us for about another minute or two while we let others join, we will go ahead then and get the session started. Good morning, everybody. We appreciate you taking the time today to attend the session on how to prevent cyber attacks and ensure HIPAA compliance. I'm Tom Leahy. I am the Vice President of Sales and Business Development with Aegify, and we greatly appreciate you taking time out to join this session. As we all are well aware, the increased amount of cyber attacks and the high regulations around HIPAA and other types of compliance continues to grow significantly. I'm going to introduce today's founder, Anupam Sahai, who will be conducting this session. Anupam is an expert in the field of cybersecurity, compliance, and healthcare IT, and holds 3 international patents. Anupam, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you in just a minute, but just briefly, we're going to go into some of the things that we're well aware of the increasing focus in this area, and then talk to you a bit about Aegify and how we got started and how we've been attacking and providing solutions for organizations like yourselves. So with that, Anupam, I turn it over to you.
Thank you, Tom, and good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for taking the time to attend the webinar today. The topics that I will cover today are shown here. Firstly, we'll talk about the recent explosion, literally explosion in security breaches that have taken place, and talk about what's coming. Is 2015 going to be better or worse? And then we'll talk about some of the HIPAA compliance changes that have taken place over the last few months, and how the increased enforcement is going to make every healthcare business very, very responsible to ensuring that they're looking at the security issues. I will talk about how to take care of cybersecurity risk issues and also to deal with HIPAA compliance management requirements. And HIPAA also requires that business associates need to be handled properly, and we'll talk about that. And there's a need to do continuous monitoring. It's not sufficient to have a quick assessment done one time and secure peace of mind. There's a need to do an ongoing continuous monitoring to ensure cybersecurity and to do with to ensure HIPAA compliance. So we'll talk about that, and then Aegify is the solution that we will discuss in in some detail to discuss, to talk about how Aegify solves this problem from the ground up. And then we will have a Q&A section at the end. If you have any questions that you want to ask us, please go to the question section of GoToWebinar and type it in, and we will take it up at the end of the session. So let's get started. So firstly, I want to show you a nice visualization that I like a lot, which describes, and this is updated pretty regularly, pretty much every week. And this is showing the biggest data breaches that have happened over the last few years. And as you can see, the 5th of February update was really around the Anthem Blue Cross breach that happened. So the bubble size here indicates the size of the breach, and 80 million here refers to the number of records that were breached. For example, Home Depot, the breach records were 56 million. So these are huge, humongous amount of data breaches that have happened, where lots of very critical information got stolen. eBay, 145 million. And so on and so forth. You can see that these are happening with regular frequency. Not only that, in 2014, there were a lot of breaches that took place, and 2013 and 2012. In fact, if you look at the trends of the breaches, between 2012, 13, and 14, there has been about 100% increase year over year in terms of the number of significant breaches. So the trends continue, and the cyber attackers are really very, very sophisticated. They're very organized, and businesses, even not only small businesses but large businesses, are under attack. And not only that, governments are under attack, where cyber attackers are stealing intellectual property. They're stealing protected information and critical information that's important to businesses. So this is a huge problem, and our intention today is to help address some of those issues. So going forward, what can we expect in 2015? The situation is going to get much more worse, unfortunately, and some of the attack vectors might change, as you will see here, that in 2014, 40% of all the attacks were targeting healthcare businesses. So that's a huge number. So healthcare businesses are under attack, and as I said, the attacks are now morphing from just business or enterprise level attacks, or small, medium business or enterprise level attacks, to nationwide attacks. And there are national level espionage teams that are taking companies to ransom. The recent Sony Pictures example comes to mind, where the records that was lost was only 30,000 records, but the amount of data that was stolen was in hundreds of trillions of bytes, and that resulted in severe damage to Sony Pictures, not to mention the brand damage. So the attack vectors are changing. It's going to change and morph from just Windows-only platforms to mobile platforms to non-Windows platform, and some of the flaws that were exposed in 2014 in open source and internet software will continue to be exposed and be vulnerable. And so 2015, the expectation from everybody around, from the expert community, is that cybersecurity will continue to grab the headlines and continue to be a huge problem that every business that cares about any critical information to be protected needs to worry about. So if we analyze the breaches that have happened and retrospectively look at what motivates the hackers and what are the causes of hacking, we'll see that a lot of the hacking, excuse me, cyber attacks or hacking is essentially a result of number of reasons. One is it's due to malware. It's because of stolen credentials. It's because of some vulnerability exploitation. that that can be done by a malicious insider or an outside attacker, cyber hacker. So all of these results in important information being stolen. And they're driven by a combination of financial motives. They're looking at holding companies to ransom, and there's the underground market for all this stolen information. So there is an Amazon-like marketplace where you can sell credit card information, personal information for a fee, and so there's a price that there are buyers who are willing to pay a price for all the stolen information. So there is a huge financial motive that drives some of this, besides the intellectual property that sometimes gets stolen, which can be a huge problem as well. And as I said earlier, the cyber attackers are very sophisticated, they are very organized. It literally takes them minutes and seconds to steal the information, and businesses sometimes don't discover it, or if they discover it, it takes them months to discover that a breach happened. And this is because what we find is that most of the companies, if not all the companies, are not taking simple steps to either detect or to prevent such attacks from happening. In fact, 97% of the breaches could have been easily avoidable. Easily avoidable is the key, by using very simple or intermediate controls. And that's the irony of the whole matter. There was a report earlier this week from HP where they looked at the entire 2014 set of attacks, and the conclusion was that most of these threats were known a priori, and if businesses had taken steps, simple steps, they could have been avoided. So the lesson learned here is that there is a huge problem, but businesses can be proactive in solving the problem, addressing it, and responding to these threats. So from a HIPAA compliance perspective, what I want to highlight is that there is a growing awareness and a new set of regulations that have come into effect starting September 2013. And that requires some changes in how businesses were implementing HIPAA compliance. So the changes include now that covered entities and business associates and their associated subcontractors have a shared responsibility and shared liability to enforce HIPAA compliance. So CEs can no longer have an agreement with the business associate and absolve their responsibility. There's also increased awareness and increased enforcement of audits by Office of Civil Rights, which is the enforcement agency of HHS. And the federal agency and the state auditor generals are now authorized and are enforcing HIPAA very aggressively. The fines have gone up. There is potential criminal prosecution. The fines can be up to $1.5 million per incident. That's the maximum per incident, but there's no upper limit. If you have multiple counts or multiple incidents, then the fines can rake up pretty quickly. And these fines are kept by HHS. They are shared with the whistleblowers, and so there's a huge incentive scheme put in place to ensure that these enforcement agencies are going after and enforcing the law. And some of these requirements that is a fallout of the HIPAA regulation is that there is a need to do security risk analysis on a regular basis, and the purpose really there is to ensure privacy and security of HIPAA information, which is also called PHI, the personal health information. So let's ask what does it mean to be secure, and what is really security all about? Let's start with the big question, and then we'll dive into details on in trying to answer these questions and putting together a mechanism or a set of mechanisms to help solve the problem. So what does security mean? So if you ask the question, really what you're talking about is you're trying to understand what are the critical assets that the business has. If you're a healthcare business, probably it's the PHI information that customers have shared with you, And there could be more. If you're a financial bank, you're looking at, again, personal information of your customers and other critical information. So all the critical assets that a business has is really what this question is seeking out. The second thing is you're trying to figure out, given the critical assets that you have as a company, what are the threats, what are the different threats that can compromise this data, compromise the critical assets? And the threats here can include due to people. There could be insiders who are malicious. There could be cyber hackers who are coming from through the internet into the company and stealing the data. Or it could be natural causes. There could be an earthquake-related threat. There could be a fire-related threat. So any threat that could compromise the information, compromise the critical assets is really what this question is seeking out to know. And finally, the most important question is, what happens if this data gets compromised? Given the critical assets, given the threats, are you able to detect and respond before the data is compromised? And so these are the key questions that will determine how important is security for you as an organization. And literally that question is a self-defeating argument, because every company has one or many critical assets that they're trying to protect. So really the question can also be translated into this chart that I have here. And this is really looking at all the critical assets, all the relevant threats, and if those critical assets get compromised, what are the likelihood of that compromise from happening? And what's the potential impact to the company that might result in as a result of this compromise? So if your answer is that, yeah, it's highly likely and it's very impactful, you're somewhere out here, then that's a huge problem. Or if you have critical assets that are highly impactful, they're very, very valuable, but even though they might be less likely, that's also a problem. Because if you get criminally prosecuted for violating HIPAA, that might be a low probability, but if it happens, that's pretty damning. So really the impact and likelihood is taking all these questions and the answers to these questions and mapping out for you as an organization how important is this particular set of threats that can compromise the critical information. So let's build up on this a bit further. So let's try to understand, what does security mean for what we know in our home environment, right? So if you look at our home environment, there are three things that we have typically. There are physical safeguards like locks, windows, doors that we have to prevent unauthorized persons from getting into the house. There might be a surveillance mechanism from ADT or your local surveillance company that is detecting any unauthorized entry. If they are able to breach the the protection mechanism, they're able to open the doors or locks, and once they get in, you want to make sure that you're able to detect such unauthorized entries. Even if that's if somebody is detected, the question then becomes, are you able to respond in a timely manner? And the response here could be a combination of police being called, or it could be a dog that you have to deal with the response, or it could be a gun. So there are multiple mechanisms that you could have in place to ensure that your home is secure by leveraging this protect, detect, and respond capabilities. And you can fill up multiple options here to make sure that your home is secure. And one thing to keep in mind is that there is no foolproof security. And I say that with all authority. No matter how much of protection you put in place, there's always a chance that somebody can breach in. So it's important to have the protect, detect, and respond capability together. It's not sufficient to just have a protection mechanism in place and not do detect and respond. So that's the key security framework that I want you guys to think about, is that any security mechanism should have components of protect, detect, and respond so that you're able to put the safeguards in place, detect violations, and respond to violations in a timely manner. And now this gets complicated when you talk about businesses that are on the internet, because not only you can have physical trespassing, but somebody can use the internet to get into the organizations. So there's a need for additional safeguards in this protect, detect, respond matrix. And these are the safeguards that come in from the administrative row and the technical row. So the technical is really about protecting your IT assets. Administrative is really about dealing with both technical and the physical requirements, but putting together administrative guidelines to ensure that everybody is aligned with what the needs are from a protect, detect, and respond perspective. So just, I don't want to go into the details here. Probably we'll spend some more time later. But just want to communicate the main message here is that protect, detect, and respond is a key framework. Because of businesses being on the internet, there are, besides the physical safeguards, there's also a need for technical safeguards to do this protect, detect, and respond. And the admin category is really laying down a set of streamlining, a set of policies and governance requirements to deal with all the technical and physical safeguards. So let's keep building up on this. So what comprises the definition of a critical asset? What does a critical asset mean? And critical asset can mean a number of things. It can mean people, it can be critical processes or data. It can be due to intellectual property being stolen. That's a critical asset. If intellectual property is stolen, that's a problem. Critical asset could be confidential data. It could be personal information, protected health information. Like in Anthem's case, Anthem Blue Cross's case, they lost 80 million records, which are in the category of PHI information. So roughly about 1/3 of America's PHI information has been compromised, and that's a pretty big number. And so Anthem Blue Cross will literally spend months, if not years, doing damage control, ensuring that the customers that they have been servicing are taken care of, and ensuring that they can recover from this particular breach. Operational continuity is another example. If somebody does a denial of service attack and brings down your website, your server, that's a problem. So that's a critical asset as well. And of course, all of this results in your brand getting compromised, brand getting damaged sometimes. So any critical asset that you deem to be valuable, to be important, needs to be protected. And the value of the critical asset is an important question that needs to be asked along with it. And going back to the likelihood impact question, that's the key connection that we need to establish here, is that all critical assets, given the threats, what is the likelihood and the impact of this critical asset being compromised? So why is security risk analysis important? Let's jump into the fray here and talk about what does it mean to secure critical assets? How do I go about doing it? And what are the steps to accomplish that? So security risk analysis is really the framework that's used to establish the parameters that I talked about. You're looking at the critical assets, the threats and vulnerabilities that are affecting potentially those critical assets, and the likelihood and impact that compromise will bring about. And so you're trying to create a map of all these possibilities, and thereby you're trying to estimate the risk exposure. That if you don't take care of your security issues that result from this evaluation process, from this assessment process, then you're leaving the organization prone to be compromised. And failure to, if you get breached for whatever reason, I just want to put a number up there, the average cost of a breach remediation is roughly $5.5 million. This is an average cost. So others might spend hundreds of millions of dollars, which some of the recent breaches might end up doing. Some of it might be lower, and there's roughly about, the cost estimate is roughly about $150 per record breached. So if you have 80 million records being breached for Anthem Blue Cross, you can calculate the cost go up pretty rapidly. So risk analysis is very important to protect your cybersecurity. It's also required by a number of regulations like HIPAA, PCI, FISMA, SOX. Any regulation that is trying to protect a critical asset is an important part of is important for from a risk analysis perspective. So now let's talk about there's some confusion around security versus compliance. Should I be compliant? Does it mean I'm secure? Or if I'm secure, does it mean compliant? So the answer is no. Security does not equal compliance, and compliance does not equal security. And I'll try to demystify this as we go along. So one way to think about compliance is that it establishes the security best practices program around a particular critical asset. So for example, HIPAA is putting together a set of security practices to protect, detect, and respond for protecting PHI information. Now, if you have critical assets that go beyond just the PHI, then HIPAA may not be sufficient. It might be necessary in terms of being a subset of all the security practices that you need to put in place, but it will not be sufficient to deal with all kinds of cyber attacks. So, and if you're secure, if you have a security practice in place, it doesn't mean that you can be HIPAA compliant. You might meet all the requirements, but there might be HIPAA-specific requirements to meet, to document, from a policy perspective, from a procedural perspective, that you need to put in place to meet the HIPAA audit protocol requirements. So the key message here is that security does not equal compliance, and compliance does not equal security. So what does risk management entail? I mentioned earlier that it involves identifying the key critical assets, understanding threats and vulnerabilities that are potentially going to affect the organization, and then more importantly, what has the organization done today to detect and deal with such attacks? So those are the planned / implemented security controls. If the organization has a good secure control framework in place, then they might be in a good place, good position to deal with security attacks and cyber attacks. If they're not, then there's a problem. And then the key associated question is, what is the likelihood and impact of all of this happening at this time? And so all of these variables lead you to a risk exposure score that tells you how vulnerable you are, how risky you are as an organization. And once you have that in place, there's a need for continuous risk monitoring, because things are always changing as on a daily basis. There are new vulnerabilities that are being discovered every day, literally, which are very severe. They are at the highest severity level. There might be organizational changes with new employees joining or employees leaving. There might be new assets coming into the organization, such as new laptops, new mobile devices. All of those need to be taken into account when you're trying to make sure that you're not only secure at a particular point in time 3 months ago, but you are secure in an ongoing fashion. So this is a pictorial depiction of what does risk management entail. And this is an example of a risk management model from NIST. This is the national body, security body that recommends so this framework is from NIST, and this is essentially talking about all the variables that I mentioned earlier. So the threat source that is exploiting vulnerabilities in the organization using threat events, and that might lead to critical assets being compromised. which have a certain impact and likelihood. And if there are security controls in place, then some of these attacks can be detected and prevented. And so the framework is capturing all of these variables in a very nice manner. So let's talk about HIPAA. And I mentioned that HIPAA regulations have undergone a huge change starting September 2013. And we have been working very closely to ensure that all of that is understood. So the latest requirement from HIPAA Omnibus, both if you're a covered entity or a business associate, is that you have to meet the entire HIPAA Omnibus requirements, which includes doing the assessment. It involves doing the security scanning of all of the critical assets that handle personal health information. So whether you are storing the information on a server or if you're viewing the patient information on a workstation, all of those are critical assets. There's a need to do VA or vendor management, which means that there's a shared responsibility that our entities have to ensure that any critical information that they're sharing downstream with any business associates or subcontractors are protected. And then to sum it all, there needs to be a security risk analysis that should be done on a regular basis. So all of these are requirements, whether you're a covered entity or a business associate. And the purpose here is to understand the risk exposure, to make sure that as an organization, you're taking steps to ensure privacy and security of PHI information so that it cannot be compromised. And by the way, this is also required as part of meaningful use attestation. So it's not optional. This is required not only to get the federal grants, but the penalty clauses kick in starting this year, and so this is required for those as well. So if you were to look at what does risk analysis mean, this is exactly to meet the HIPAA Omnibus requirements. This is exactly the framework that I talked about, where you're looking at all your PHI critical assets, determining the threats and vulnerabilities, what's in place from a security control perspective, looking at the likelihood and impact of these threats, and determining the risk. So that's really what HIPAA Omnibus security risk analysis requires you to do. And as I said, any risk analysis would have the same set of steps. The critical assets could change. So in HIPAA, the critical assets are PHI assets. If you're talking about a general security framework, then those critical assets could be including PHI assets, but there could be other information that you are trying to protect. It could be your earnings report, it could be your intellectual property, it could be anything that you deem to be important. So the steps are the same, the different scoping of these steps would vary whether you are looking at a particular compliance regulation. So for PCI, you would look at assets that handle PII, what's called personal identifiable information that relates to social security numbers or credit card information that needs to be protected. So the steps are the same, the scoping is different. And once you know that what the risk exposure is, the next step is to understand what needs to be done to fill the problems or to remediate the problems that are found, and that's really the purpose behind this framework. So what should one do if you're looking at general cybersecurity, and as an organization you are interested in protecting not just your PHI information, but any critical asset? And for that, there's a framework that has been designed from the ground up to ensure cybersecurity hardening of the organization, and that's called SANS 20. As the name 20 suggests, there are 20 critical controls that is recommended by this particular framework, and this includes dealing with the different stages of the cybersecurity hardening process that I talked about, namely protect, detect, and respond. And I'll talk about what does that mean. So the reason it works is that this has been developed by an international council of security experts. It's also been blessed by the federal government. They have been working on a cybersecurity framework which uses this, and this is a continuously evolving framework where experts continuously weigh in depending on the latest emerging threat vectors. This is continuously updated. And one key movement here is that we're talking about security controls. So compliance controls can be specific to a regulation, but SANS 20 deals with security controls that are critical to the organization. And this is a very active community comprising of experts in the field. So I don't want to cover this whole thing here, but I just want to say that SANS 20 deals with the entire cyber defense lifecycle. So if you look at these 4 stages, the first 2 stages are really about protection, where you're looking at excuse me, resource hardening, you're looking at access control, and then detection and response. So the cyber defense lifecycle of protect, detect, and response is covered by the SANS 20, and there are controls. You can look at these numbers. These are controls coming from SANS 20 that fit into these different buckets to make sure that it spans the entire cyber defense lifecycle. So if you're a business that's looking for cybersecurity hardening, this is the framework that we recommend. And again, I won't go into the details here, but suffice it to say that these controls, there are 20 of these controls that deal with different cycles. They deal with devices, software, hardware, dealing with malware, vulnerability assessment. So the protect, detect, response cycle is covered by these controls here. So why are the programs falling short? Why are the current security programs falling short? And I would say the main reason is that there is a lot of confusion around, should I be, if I'm compliant, should I be secure? If I want to deal with security, and how does it relate to risk management? So while they are interrelated, hopefully the session today has helped shed some light on that they are not equal, and risk and security are joined at the hip, in the sense that risk is really the key value proposition for determining what kind of security practices you need to put in place. And we talked about security and compliance earlier. So the key really comes down to which security controls frameworks to put in place, which one to choose, and the other challenge is that there are a number of solutions that are out there. There are a number of point solutions that are out there that are very expensive, hard to deploy, incomplete, and they don't give you a complete unified picture, complete integrated picture. And that's really the sort of challenges that we set out to solve when we launched the solution that I'm going to talk about, Aegify. And as I said earlier, the irony is that most of these attacks can be prevented by simple security controls. And this has been borne out through research. So when we set out to provide this solution, Aegify, the key objective was to provide one single unified application that takes care of all of your security, risk, and compliance needs. And it's a cloud-based subscription solution that takes care of security scanning, it takes care of risk management, and it also has support for all of the compliance frameworks that as businesses you would need. So there's HIPAA, PCI, FISMA, all of these compliance frameworks are built in. But we're not looking at security, risk, and compliance as independent views into security. They are unified using an expert system that takes care of integrating the data from all these different information sources and provides you with complete guidance, expert guidance on what to do, how to do it, and how to accomplish the protect, detect, and respond. And it comes pre-packaged with standards, policies, templates, best practices, so that you can learn as you go along and adopt what you have today. So if you go back to the framework of what we talked about, protect, detect, and respond, any mature cybersecurity solution needs to have these elements in place. And suffice it to say that Aegify was designed from the ground up to deal with the complete cyber defense life cycle, to deal with the complete HIPAA or any compliance related requirements. So Aegify is a solution that takes care of all of these aspects in a single application through unification. This is the automation that's built into the tool. I won't spend too much time on it, but I want to show you that the tool has built-in capabilities to automate all of this process through a very simple lifecycle management process. And the stage is protect, detect, and respond. You can do a baseline to understand where you stand. You fix all the problems, and then you do continuous monitoring to ensure that you're staying on top of any new issues that are happening. And you can schedule repetitions. You can schedule all of these processes, all of these stages from being detected, responding to, and the tool will give you expert guidance to help you manage the process and monitor the process. There's a real-time dashboard that gives you your current status at any point in time. There are copious reports that help you navigate information. So from a differentiated perspective, what we have developed is very unique in the industry. As I said, we have a single platform that takes care of security, risk, and compliance assurance. We deal with the protect, detect, and response stages to ensure that the complete security holistic view is taken into account. There's a built-in expert system that I talked about that integrates otherwise separate views of security, risk, and compliance into one single action plan. So you get single dashboard, single action plan, and you can remediate or solve all the problems that are found through a single action plan. And the other advantage is you can do all of this remotely. We made this cloud deployable, so you don't have to buy hardware. Everything is software driven, and it's very cost effective and scalable. You can buy one service, add services or locations to enhance what you have today as you go along. We have a complete risk management model that we have implemented in the solution, and the solution has complete support for all the frameworks that I talked about, SANS 20, HIPAA, PCI. There's complete integration with security scanning, risk management, and we support 800 plus frameworks beyond this. If there's a particular framework, regulation framework that you as a business are interested in, we would most probably have that in our database. So it's a complete solution to take care of all of the security, risk, and compliance needs that's available using a software-based subscription, and you can use this to protect all of the critical assets, not just certain categories of assets in the organization. This is what the dashboard looks like. I won't spend too much time on it, but suffice it to say that you have an overall view of your organization, what's your security posture, if you're secure or not, if you're compliant, if you need to have compliance with HIPAA as a guideline, as a mandate, you will also know that. And then there are dashboards that you can click and drill down and get more detailed operational view to understand what needs to be fixed and when. And by the way, you have access to a community edition. This is a free edition that you can download from this URL. If you're interested in learning more, just go to this URL if you can, egistol.com/community, where you can download a free edition that has some of these capabilities that you can play around with. We have a complete risk management framework that's automated. I won't go through this detail, but suffice it to say that we make it automated, much simpler for you. Otherwise, it might be a manual process that might take months, if not weeks. Typically, it's a 2 to 3 month project, and it involves lots of resources that might get involved. The tool here does most of the heavy lifting to gather all the information, to give you all the information so that you can make a decision on where you are exposed from a risk perspective, and then you can put controls in place to understand where the most ROI will be from an effort perspective. You will also get a risk dashboard, which gives you a heat map of your most critical assets, most critical controls that are missing, and then you can play around with it to get a sense of where should the effort be focused on. So in closing, I went through a lot of information today, and we will continue to have these sessions once or twice a month. We do these webinars regularly. But to summarize, cyber attacks are rising. They've risen year over year from 2012 onwards, and 2015 will continue to grow much rapidly. And of course, compliance specialists, whether it's HIPAA or PCI, also puts together a set of security requirements that need to be followed. Otherwise, the penalties, there's potential criminal prosecution in the case of HIPAA if you don't follow the law. And the current solutions from a market landscape perspective are siloed. There's no unified platform, and e-installed Aegify has been built from the ground up to address the cybersecurity hardening problem, to deal with the protect, detect, and response cyber defense life cycle that I talked about. And you can also use it for getting compliance for HIPAA, PCI. If OCR comes auditing, the Office of Civil Rights comes auditing you for HIPAA, we meet the HIPAA audit protocol requirements from OCR. You can generate a report that can be used for showing what you've done, that you're compliant. You can also generate a report for getting your meaningful attestation done if you need to submit proof for security risk analysis. And of course, if you're looking at a broader security framework, we can help you there as well. So that's the summary of the talk. Let's pause here and see whether you have any questions that we can help answer.
Thanks, Tom. This is Tom, and we have a big audience, and I see a lot of questions that have come up in the panel. So if we can address those, but just one that has come up, of course, for all the participants is we will be making copies of these slides available to you. You will receive a follow-up from us that will include access to these slides and this information.
Sure.
So, Anupam, why don't you go ahead into some of the other questions that have been addressed
Sure.
by the participants.
So there's a question about why the need for continuous monitoring. That's a great question. The reason you want to do continuous monitoring is to ensure that, as I always say, security and compliance is a journey. And while you might be secure or compliant at a point in time, things change. There are vulnerabilities that are discovered every week. There might be new employees joining, new assets coming in. So it's important to stay on top of those on all those changes. There might be new regulations that are getting updated every quarter or every 6 months. So all of these changes means that while you might be secure and compliant a few months ago, you may be out of it. And so continuous monitoring allows you to stay on top of all these changes and ensure that your risk exposure and your security status is maintained. And that's the key advantage.
So, Anupam, I see a question asking about, can you speak more to the meaningful use attestation and how the system helps with that?
That's right. Okay. So meaningful use attestation has, depending on the stage of attestation, there are a number of CQMs, clinical quality measures, that have been put in place by the government. And one of the key measures that needs to be supported by every medical organization is the need to do security risk analysis. There are 13 others or 14 others, depending on the stage, which deal with the EHR information, how electronic health records, medical records have been used to prescribe, e-prescribe information. But one of them, the security risk analysis, which is one of 14 or one of 15 takes 70% of the time. And that requirement is that you have to do security risk analysis of your entire organization. And our tool helps you accomplish that task, which otherwise can be manual, can be complete. We help you do a security risk analysis of the organization. You can generate a report that you can submit to the government for meeting the meaningful use requirement.
Anupam, thank you. There's another question that I will try to do here. Lots of security points to check. Here's one. Drilling down, does the scan identify our laptop fleet that does not have disk encryption?
Sorry, you broke up a little there. So if I understand you correctly, does the scan identify whether we don't have disk encryption? Is that correct?
The question is, does the scan identify our laptop fleet that does not have disk encryption?
Okay, so the question is, can we automatically identify whether the disk encryption is not in place? So the security scan will discover vulnerabilities that are found for the hard disk or the laptop where data is stored. There is a data discovery process that's also available where you can detect any unencrypted information being or sensitive information which might be lying around. So that's the data discovery, the technique used to discover that. Security scanning will discover vulnerabilities, which means whether you have any configuration problems, if you have a router, firewall, if you haven't changed the default admin password. It also discovers whether you need any software updates that might be exploitable, or if there are patches that you need to download. All those discovered by security scanning. The data discovery will take care of what you just mentioned.
Great. Another question is, can you expand on how the solution helps in the management of my business associates? I'm a covered entity. How did the solution help me in that regard?
Yeah, so the business associate compliance. So the covered, as I said earlier, as I said earlier, the new HIPAA omnibus law requires that covered entities and BAs have a shared responsibility to ensure privacy and protection of PHI. So it's no longer sufficient that covered entities say that I've left that responsibility to a BA. And so the covered entities have to be proactive about ensuring that the BAs are compliant with HIPAA and that they are taking steps to ensure privacy and security of PHI. What the tool does is it allows you to not only manage your internal security compliance posture, but it allows you to manage get visibility into your business associates and vendors that you work with. So you can use the tool to assess your business associates and vendors, and thereby know exactly where do they stand from a security and HIPAA compliance perspective. And what that allows you to do is to proactively then work with your business associates and vendors to ensure that they are following the law. Because if they lose the data as a covered entity, you are liable, you are responsible as per the new law. So it's in your interest as a covered entity to ensure that your BA's vendors are HIPAA compliant too. What is the source on the cost of the remediation of, sorry, go ahead, Tom.
No, go ahead. I didn't see that question.
What is the source on the cost of remediation of a breach? I believe this data comes from Ponemon, P-O-N-E-M-O-N. I will add that reference after digging it up, but it's through a number of sources, I believe, from Ponemon, and also Computer Security Institute has this information on a yearly basis that gets updated.
We have time for a few more. There's one question here about, you mentioned that if I install the system and run a scan, what kind of reports do I get out of it? Can you explain a little bit more about what the remediation and vulnerability reports mean?
Okay. Yes, the reports that you can get out of this, depending on the services that you have subscribed to, you can get a report on compliance. So for example, if you have deployed the HIPAA compliance and security solution, you'll be able to generate a report on compliance which tells you exactly where you stand from a HIPAA compliance perspective. So there will be a gap report which tells you the gaps that exist. There will also be a remediation report which tells you how to fix the gaps that are found. So that's part of the reporting that we have. Then there is also the security scan report which tells you which assets in the organization are secure and are not vulnerable, and each one of them are vulnerable. And then again, it will give you complete guidance on how to fix the assets that are vulnerable. So all of that is included in the reports that you can generate with the click of a button. And of course, the risk report, which will tell you your overall risk posture from a security and risk perspective. And if you subscribe to the BA management module, then you will have a report that tells you exactly what the current status of all the current BAs and vendors are that you've worked with. And all of this information will be available also in real time on the dashboard. So besides, you can generate reports, but you'll also see them on the dashboard.
Great. Well, I want to be sensitive to everyone's time. Thank you, everyone, for participating in this session. As Anupam mentioned, we will, of course, be sending out copies of the slides to all of those of you who have attended this presentation. And certainly, if you have any additional questions that we were not able to address today, please, as you can see, contact us at www.egify.com, and we will be happy to follow up with you and address any issues that you may have. So with that, unless there's anything else on the phone, I want to thank the attendees for attending today.
Yeah, thank you all for coming, and have a great afternoon.